record on this computer. And we're recording. Wonderful. So this interview this conversation that we're about to embark on tonight, at least tonight here, is part of this series of interviews with people who are involved in collaborative and democratic approaches to funding and moving money in service of a just transition. And this discovery process that we're into is sensing into what a lab, an action learning lab could look like in the course of 2021, where that could accelerate and just take this collaborative funding inquiry to the next level. And so we have a set of questions, Greg, that we'd like to explore with you. And the first one being that I would like you to tell us a specific experience you have had of collaborative or democratic funding that was highly successful or valuable in some way. And
thank you. Well, the thought that came to my mind before you finished the question was maybe reframing or thinking about highly successful. Because I read the post-carbon report that is, what is it called? It's in front of me right now, the Weaving the Community Resilience and New Economy movement, right? And you're all familiar with that. And I think that was one of the things that you sent me, Leslie, and I think all of you sent me in preparation for today. And I was looking at the people quoted in that piece. And many of those people were among the folks that inspired me to hold the vision that I continue to carry, that is our vision, where at the Business Alliance for Local Living Economy conferences, I would go every year because my group that I'd mentioned earlier was a monthly meetup in Los Angeles, which was the LA Bali network, where we had an informal structure and a monthly meetup was more or less our initiative. Yet that led to a whole range of other things. And because I'm a person that's focused on innovating finance to enable every investor to be able to bring their money home, it surprises me that even today, many of the structures that are necessary where someone can just walk into their bank and say, I want my individual retirement account invested in the bioregion that I live in, that is not readily available, right? And the notion that that should be readily available started me in this movement in 2004, when at the SRI conference, I did my first public speaking by creating a panel discussion on this very topic to make it easy for someone with $5,000 to put it entirely into their bioregion. And we all know, I think, that that's relatively straightforward for someone who's an accredited investor with a lot of money to diversify that can hold in illiquid instruments, yet to be able to buy what would be a relatively secure liquid instrument for an individual with a small amount of money has yet to really happen. And here it is 16 years later. And as I went through the motions and going to all these conferences and listening to all the experts and observing the securities laws and the regulatory and Wall Street framework, it became evident to me that it was possible. The tools were already in place, but the issue is that the intention and the design thinking was not in place to use these tools in an innovative mechanism. And also it surprised me, and again, this was at that time, so I'm not characterizing today, but at that time, the Bali network Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, 80 chapters of locally owned businesses working together, we're still a disparate community which had insufficient coordination among all of the different networks, both digitally with listing the businesses to find out whose businesses are where, and the next layer would, how could we create a co-funding model? And even to the point where the conferences at that time in themselves didn't even have the topic of funding on the agenda. So I and a handful of other folks, Don Schaefer, when he was running Bali, instigated getting a room and finding a space at the physical location and getting anybody who wants to talk about digital or funding. And we would have these two discussions every year for a few years to coordinate both, to create a platform to identify all the businesses that are in the network and have a list, and then to create from that list who's investable, and then ideally create a funding network, and a fund itself was something that I spent some time with. But that being that I am a financial planner that didn't have the investment capital to launch my own fund, or that, I continued to work with groups that could do that, but none of them would do that because it was just the next step beyond their reach to launch such an innovative product, because it required coordinating all of the businesses locally that are currently not funded and all of the networks of people to find those businesses and identify the investable ones, and then simultaneously creating a structure to enable those businesses, once found and once identified, embedded, to be put into a funding network across the country. That theoretically, if we had 80 networks at that time with 30,000 businesses, and that there were theoretically 5,000 of those 30,000 businesses that needed money, but the network identified 500 that were investment ready and good investments, then that process of filtering down to that 500 needed to have some collective intelligence processes and some sophistication and acumen with respect to financeability. And then lastly, some sophistication as to how to coordinate them in an investment structure that everyone can put their money into. That last mile, ironically, was the most straightforward and in some ways the most complex, because it required thinking of people that launch mutual funds and Wall Street organizations. And most of those people don't know how to talk about the local economy movement in the manner that we all do. So then it was bridging two networks that do not know each other's language. And that was the most challenging, was the social situation among these networks of disparate parties, of finance on one side and community activists on another. And today, in reviewing the video of TRCC and seeing all of the logos in the network, most of those groups are on the civic side, the community organizing side, and few of them, but there are some there that are sophisticated on the finance side, but most of the funder discussion is from the standpoint of philanthropic funding because of the need, but not necessarily for that last mile to put my investment dollars in a retirement account that needs fiduciary responsibility. That part is still elusive in our community, of that deep financial sophistication necessary for our pensions and our financial advisors to say that will not lose your money. So that gives you, Dunia, an example of what actually happened in a very comprehensive high-level list. But the success that I saw that you asked for was the fact that many of those people are in that document. So that here we are still connected, having conversation, and the fact that we're discussing this today of something that I somewhat put on the shelf 8-9 years ago, working on some of the pieces that were difficult. to come back to this now means that we're having success because we're still resilient. There's still a caterpillar in the chrysalis, but the butterfly is still emergent. It's still alive. So I feel we can launch now. And the butterfly is ready to come out, to use a Bloom network, invoking our Bloom network, and all of our ideas of imaginal cell catagenesis, which is another term that's going a little bit more esoteric. But I know that was a rather comprehensive answer, but I wanted to be thorough to cover the things that came to mind.
Yeah, I really appreciate the way that you spoke of the pieces that were needed, the language that the common language that wasn't there. And I'm wondering if, in your experience, it sounds like in the past 9 years you put that in the shelf, but in your experience, something perhaps particular where you experienced collective wisdom being used, or to move those resources, or a specific story of networks creating value. So something that would be, because I think that the background and your vision is really helpful, but in order for us to move forward with the question, it's going to be very useful for you to share a nugget of like something that was very personal in terms of success.
Thank you.
Or an innovative way of using philanthropic capital. Yeah, something.
Yeah. So for me, my recognition has been always that the money is already in the system. Namely, if in Bali, the Philadelphia network that was the lunch, the sustainable business network, or any one of those vibrant communities during that time, one of the key principles of that design conversation was to let go of the idea of needing to go find money. There's literally billions of dollars in bank accounts in every major city and every small city in the country that these Bali networks lived in. Yet the simple structures to enable those who have power over that money to move it into something that's logically necessary is not because there's not a will. It's just that there's not an easy path to make that straightforward. So my focus was always on that difficult part that is still elusive, because I didn't focus on launching a fund or going to one funder and saying, let's get $10 million. And here's a good example of success. And what I meant by kind of putting that down also wasn't quite putting that down, but it meant to, for me, from 2002 to 2012, going to all these different groups that you might have heard me mention of, we already talked about Green Festival Pioneers, all the, you might say, the alternative movement, for lack of a better word. And even the Socially Responsible Investment Conference had a lot of people that were in the current system, as it were, the Wall Street folks, the bankers, the regulators, people that were in positions in the establishment, in the system that has been underway that we're looking to transform. Yet most of those conversations were on the edge, wanting to influence the conventional system and the old infrastructure of institutions. So what I began doing in 2011 and 12 is moving directly into those discussions with people that have no idea what we're talking about. And more recently, in talking with Steve Sheath, who ran the SRI conference for 28 years, he said, Greg, 95% of the people that are in SRI and impact investing, ESG and impact investing, are not necessarily focused on that dimension of systems change. So the 5% that are also having to be sophisticated to be able to talk with the SEC or the Federal Reserve Bank or the think tanks that are trying to change policy. And very few people in impact investing or this movement are in those circles. So I became very curious about being a pioneer from our movement into those ways. So at the Bali conference in Bellingham, Washington, I met two women at the same time that you probably know of. One of them, Kat Taylor, and her innovation by creating a bank within the conventional model was her radical innovation. And then Glenda Humiston, who I met, who was on a panel right next to Kat. And Glenda and I hit it off immediately, and I did with Kat as well. But Glenda came to Los Angeles the next week, and we began talking. And her work at the time was she was part of the Obama administration at the US Department of Agriculture. And she heard everything you know I've just mentioned enough to say every individual in California who has a 401k plan at their job where they go in and put a part of their paycheck into a plan every month can put 1% of that money into a community investment, just like you're talking about, Greg. But let's create that, because to try to get another 10 or 20 million dollars in the system isn't going to change the system. If we did this in California for only 1% of the 401ks, it's $10 billion a year. And 5% was really the goal, which was $50 billion a year. So what I began doing is researching all of the Wall Street and mutual fund and regulatory frameworks for that kind of system, and identified that that is possible. And even if we accumulated that $10 billion in 2012, I told her that I talked to all the community development financial institutions that I knew at the time, Rudolph Steiner Foundation, the Northern California Community Loan Fund, other community loan funds, all small venture groups. Their goal was to raise another 20 or $30 million, maybe 50 or 100. But when we talked about the idea of those groups getting $300 million each, it was just too much for them. They didn't know what to do with that amount of money based on the deal flow that they saw, which means that we had excess money in the model. So we would have to buy conventional investments. And this movement that we've just talked about earlier was not able to deploy the money at scale. So then the celebrations of getting another $3 million in a loan fund in Oakland was not meeting the scale that we saw the opportunity. So we had to redesign the thinking. So what she did when I told her that limitation was, I think, what came to mind, Dunia, when you said, what about success? Well, the success was that she asked me to join the steering committee of California Forward, where she was with me. And she said she started another group, and I ran the capital markets policy team called the Capital Action Team with the governor's office and other folks all throughout the state, looking at this very complex set of questions. And we conducted meetings every year, all those years until a couple of years ago. And then because of that, an additional success was the Milken Institute invited me to help think about these kinds of problems in banking, to then take the kind of Kat Taylor model and spread it throughout the entire banking industry. And that work led them to bring other bankers together. And then that became a partnership with the Small Business Administration based on the kind of initial catalytic conversations that I was helping facilitate. So I'd say those are rather successful movements and very successful outcomes. Yet for me, I'm still very unsatisfied because we have yet to see a funding structure land and money go in. But I would also never be satisfied with $30 million in one fund or $50 million when we're seeing $3 trillion in California in these funds that we need to move only 1%, which is about 30 billion. So unless we're getting close to 500 million to $1 billion, I just said it's not worth putting my attention on unless it can actually move that kind of money. So that's where I'm just focused on that kind of thing. But I would say I feel very successful that I've gone this far where I feel like I'm actually approaching the outcome that Glenda asked for at that beginning conversation in 2011, which is we now, I feel, can achieve that result and put that thing on every 401k plan now within the next couple of years to enable every one of us. And then it would not be limited to California. Ideally, that would be the model. And that's the intention of my focus on California, that it would not limit us to this, but by limiting it to California within the leadership here, then we can inspire the rest of the country and replicate it 50 different times. Now that is success, but we're close. So the fact that I'm in the game, it feels like I've achieved a lot, even though I sometimes sit here when the storm clouds are coming over and going, what have you done? Nothing is happening. And I'm like, I know. But then I have to remember there's always a rainbow behind that cloud. So that's my rather robust and complex
Thank you
attempt
for
at
sharing.
answering the question directly. And
Thank
there's
you.
many details that I can share, but that gives you the high level structure of the storyline that got me to here.
Wonderful. And from that high level structure, I want you to pull out, if you were to summarize or to just pick out the key elements, whether it was values or resources or assets or connections that contributed to that being, to you considering that a success.
I think many of you know who Hazel Henderson is, right? And if you don't know Hazel, I have one of her books here, as a matter of fact, Building a Win-Win World. And I met Hazel in 1989 when I was 24. And that was the time I learned about capital markets. After studying it in college, I graduated in 88. And also I learned about responsible investing. And I learned about sustainable development because the conference that Hazel and I met at was the first time that United Nations announced the idea of sustainable development in America, here in Los Angeles, of all places. And I was, as a student representative of a group, invited to present on what my student group had done in the direction of sustainable development. So that moment, meeting all these luminaries, Maurice Strong, Barbara Marx Hubbard, all the people that we would, revere, they informed my worldview that led me to what we know. And then I still communicate with Hazel regularly, and we're actually working on some writing projects together. She was just on a small local television show that I helped put together here in Los Angeles a few days ago. And we talked just a few days ago, and what she's always said to me is, your network is your net worth. And that value of the depth and breadth of relationship is the treasure house that I and we have of all the people that we know that would resonate with everything I just said. But imagine what I just said as a group of categories of people that still resonate, but do not necessarily weave effectively. But we have all this unlocked wealth in the people that I read in those documents and I saw on the video. There still is so much untapped potential that I'm committed to continuing my work to make that unlock so we can actually pull that cash out of the global casino and watch literally billions of dollars goes into the communities, because that's the membrane that impact investing has yet to break out of. And the most of the impact investing funds are still trying to go to the people that are paying attention to this, but there's a perceived scarcity of dollars because of the mindset bubble that prevents us from using our true net worth to relate to the people in adjacent systems of thinking and unlock the real wealth and the real money that we have in our state pensions, in our bank accounts, in our 401ks, where there's literally trillions of dollars. And that idea of billions to trillions is the wealth, because it's not about the money. It's about the ability to unlock these relationships and catalyze the movement of our cash. And just philanthropy alone, and using the mindset of donation dollars to catalyze change, is only the beginning. Because a good example of this, I don't know if it's a good example, but the one that comes to mind is a personal friend of mine made a donation to the LA River Coalition, and that donation enabled them to apply to the Army Corps of Engineers to unlock $1 billion of government money to rethink the river of Los Angeles. So that's where philanthropy has to be seen as a catalyst to unlock capital that is not in the conversation, rather than donating to a project in small-minded thinking that says another $10 million in the system is actually going to change the system, which it will not. We need to use that $10 million to unlock $1 billion. And that's the potential we have yet to realize. So back to your question, the success and the value I hold in my life is the capacity to see and say what I just did with credibility, and to have relationships with all the folks that I know that represent these categories of relationship and types of thought. But then the opportunity is to weave that together to create a real system that is before, and a responsibility that I think all of us have. It's a dire responsibility, because those of us that see our piece are not seeing the system when we're not listening to the others, right? But we also see the piece, but we're holding on to the petal of the flower, or we're holding on to the root of the tree, or the branch, or the leaf, or the fruit, but we're not looking at the entire system. And that is the challenge of our movement of small-minded thinking that I feel that all of us have to challenge. Even myself, when saying this, I see some of the limitations of my own thought.
Beautiful. Thank you, Greg, for that. So now, and I could already listen to some of what the wishes might be, but I would like you to formulate 3 wishes that you could that you'd want right now in order to support the success of that larger vision, or that you've just shared, or that those possibilities, to see them come true. What would those 3 wishes be? And being concrete will be helpful in the next step.
Well, thank you, Dunia. And you've asked very specific questions, and I know I have more specific answers than I've given, but I've also laid down something that I think is a very specific framework, that when we actually look at the specificity of what I said, the product will naturally emerge from the system without needing to say, I want the product. For example, if we say, we want vegetables and fruit, but we're going to create raised beds, we're going to get wood, we're going to get soil, we're going to get water, we're going to get people that are going to take care of the plants, we're going to get seeds, we know inevitably there is a bounty of fruit and vegetables in that system by ensuring and trusting that it will unlock itself once we create the conditions for life.
Let me perhaps.
And I know
you spoke of language so beautifully, because we all have our own way of expressing ourselves. So I'm understanding that you perhaps didn't understand. I find, on the contrary, that you've already named some very specific wishes in what you've described, in the vastness of what you've described. So on the contrary, I'm tempted to tell you these are the three wishes I heard, but that's not my role as a listener. But I see that there are wishes of certain relationships, or certain
I see them.
visions of certain shared language, and perhaps you could name those
Thank you.
wishes.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Dunia. And I know I was dancing around, but you know, I like dancing at parties. I mean, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm so happy that our dance is recorded, because then I can be like, oh, vroom, vroom, vroom. So please dance away.
So, so the short version of the three wishes. And thank you again. I love the way that you've asked these questions, and I love your way of interviewing, Dunia. It's marvelous, and I think all of you hold this, and I just know that she's the voice of this. You are the voice of it, Dunia. So all of you, just very grateful again, and it just very moving to just bring this magic to form through my words that you've evoked, that you know we all hold, but being able to speak it into the space and watch that crucible of magic and let our shared resonant field allow these sacred principles and messages and energies that I hold to have an even more fertile place to land, knowing that the preconditions that we're very fertile soil together is deeply moving to me alone. And that I want to make sure, once again, I acknowledge how valuable this has already been, regardless of the outcome, because I feel so much potential is just catalyzed. Like when you put the water on the seed looks the same, but all of a sudden there's a lot going on in there, you know, and it sits there for a week and you just go, oh, it's a seed. Yeah, but you know, there's a forest in there. So three, Dunia. I just want you to know I'm holding this. I grabbed this today. It's a patina of
It's like a
what's that?
like
Pyrite, pyritized. It's a pyritized ammonite, but it's one of those ones that has the pyritization is rainbow. And I'd look at this because this little guy had some trouble one day, and you know, he was running around and eating, and you know, he was doing fine, and then all of a sudden it didn't work out. But you know, I have my days when I'm like, I'm running around eating, and I have to just remember 100 million years ago, don't get so hung up on it, just live, you know, be your magic and be yourself, and let the flow, you know, the arc of thought, trust the arc of nature and my place in it. So that's I think I want to do this as I'm grabbing an extra one and saying this is a precondition. The wish is that everything I just said in that as an arc of thought of biomimicry for systems is the thing, but I'll give you the three specific, but that listening to each other and nature and the innate thriving life that we have inside of us is all of it, but how it lives in me today for the people that I love and serve, who are government leaders or economic development leaders, impact investors, philanthropic leaders, systems designers, and maybe 10 or 20 other categories of individuals. I've talked about 130 people in the last 6 months of all those categories, from investment bankers to you name it, technologists, blockchain. And I just map, and every one of them have a piece of this magic. And I see that, so those of us that can see like we see, I may be one of the only in that circle that sees how they all fit into a larger pattern. So the one first wish is that may some of those people who are more see what I see better. And when I think in 12 dimensions, and people ask me, can you write this down and put it into a mind map? Probably, but if I thought in 4 dimensions, I could put it into a 2-dimensional sketch. But when I'm thinking 12 dimensions, how do I put that into I don't have a 4-dimensional, sketch pad. So that's why it's been held, and I just have it held as a possibility set. And all of that lives inside of the work I'm doing now with California Forward. It's called the California Capital Markets Task Force. And we're moving into phase 3 since I launched at SOCAP last year. So the first wish is, in reflecting on the possibility that there are funders, not necessarily to fund me, but to fund the catalytic pieces of the system to come together for an initial expression of the first of many systemic expressions, then that wish is to articulate one, that the first wish is to articulate that vision in a coherent and tangible manner, not only for my role of convening and orchestrating and pulling together the system that very few see, but also to fund those folks who are playing the necessary pieces of that system to enable that individual in every city in California to put their money back home. One, that's a 12-dimensional discussion. So one is the initial funding, and there's 3 or 4 different groups that have indicated to me that they're interested in identifying if they could possibly be part of funding, but they see their piece. But if we put each of those 4 and then the TRCC 5 interest, then how would we meet all of those interested parties that see their piece of what I see is part of that one, and then mapping that out and putting it into a deck that then has 5 or 10 different outcomes potentially for each of the funders to put their piece in and then trust the system is one. But 2, that system alone is not enough. It has to do its job, which is to take money from where we have in bank accounts that are locked in treasury bonds or stock market or mutual funds, and then take at least a small percentage in more than one community across a bioregion. I'm thinking like Cascadia is one because it stretches from California to Alaska and has 2 countries involved. That could be a model of implementation. So the next step would be to take that pure stage 1 wish, and then stage 2 is to get into actual work of identifying investable projects, just in the exact manner that the TRCC movement does, but from taking all of the co-fund ideas and putting them into the circle for a co-creative evaluation circle of a deal structure for all the different deals together, but just taking that exact thought process. So when I saw your video, that identical thought process, but instead of funders and philanthropic projects, put investment banks, mayors, county boards of supervisors, pensions, and venture capitalists and impact investors who are trying to lend money to farms and cities and businesses. And then it just up levels the structure to create a new social model inside of the decision-making process of conventional finance, which still, ironically, 30 years later, does not have a collective intelligence decision-making process for bioregional finance. So that's 2. 3 is, once we see that moving in the conventional circles, the County Board of Supervisors for Sonoma says we're going to take 500 million of our pension and put it into this collective process. And then that inspires 30 other counties in California to do that with their pension. That's still part of part 2. But we see that model working because we see proven practices. And there's very specific things that need to be done in that stage 2, which are very economic and financial engineering mechanisms of the infrastructure of financial markets, which is very esoteric, but not really, it's just very basic finance. So that's all part of 2. So once that starts moving and we start seeing 300, 500 million, 30 million, 20 million, and we see it catalyzing across many communities, then we have to challenge a theory of change that we've seen in our movement. That, I mean, one of the best examples is, does everyone or anyone remember the Evergreen Cooperatives in Cleveland? Remember that? The idea of the
Sure.
Mondragon Cooperatives. Does anyone know about Mondragon?
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of Mondragon was very successful, as we know, right? And anyone not know what I'm talking about, I'm happy to just go there for a moment if you need. Anyone? We're all good?
I think
So
we're.
then that idea inspired the Evergreen Cooperative to use a similar model for the local economy of local supply chain and local worker-owned businesses in Cleveland, where like the laundry for hospitals and universities became a worker-owned cooperative. And when I heard about that in 2006 and 7, I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. It's going to create a movement. But then how many people do we know in our movement that said, I'm going to do that in Poughkeepsie or in Austin or in Compton or in Santa Monica or Fresno? So the is in plus setting enough to know how to take that and to put it into form. Whatever the limitation was that caused that not to happen when we presumed it would, and observed over many years that it just wasn't a matter of time, it was a matter that there was a missing piece of the machinery. We must build that piece of machinery so that once we see 20 counties in the west coast of Oregon, Washington, and California adopt this model for their pensions, to have the naivete that the other 300 counties with 500 cities and $500 billion of money would actually move money just because it's working over there is proof that we're not paying attention to reality. So we have to challenge that assumption and get into the specificity of ensuring that people are trained and implementing these new systems that are available. Because the biggest challenge I've seen in the last 10 years is tools in capital markets innovation are available and legal, and the problem is people are just not using them. Crowdfunding is not happening in every part of the country, and it's been legal for 10 years. So that's a perfect example of what we need to challenge ourselves and get into the deployment of these things and educating people that are in the conventional system. So that's part 3, is to then actually ensure that people know how to implement these tools that are proven to work in others. And the proof alone of seeing something happen doesn't make people change their behavior. We need to get into supporting them where they're at, in red state communities especially. So that's my 3.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Thank you.
I've thought about this.
Yeah, I saw you. You were going around, had your little thing because it was cooking. I appreciate that. And this is wonderful. And there's so much food. So we're at the end of 2021 now. The whole year has happened. And the vision has been articulated in a coherent, cohesive way with all the stakeholders you've mentioned. And the money, there is now a deal structure and the model of implementation has been fleshed out, and that the potential for the domino effect and for really that machinery to be deployed, and the machinery, the piece of the machinery that was missing is now very clear, and we're able to really get into the specificity because the people who are part of that specificity are at the table. So this has happened through this lab that we have, that you've experienced. And so from that place, we're at the end of 2021. In the past tense, I want you to take your time and just get there. Who was there? What, who else was part of the lab? What happened? Tell me about it. How did it feel? What, what were you able to give, and what were you able to receive? What surprised you? Maybe you overcame some problems. Maybe you were disappointed in some other ways. Tell us.
It's a good party. Well, what you evoked, Dunia, is something that I hold very clearly today, which continues because I see it so clearly today. I know it's not only possible, it's just a matter of time to bring these pieces together. So specifically what I've shared of the possibility of these things already exist. They're just not. So, I mean, the way it has been said, but I'm not going to say it this way. The future is already here, is not widely distributed, is the conventional way of saying what I recognize, but it's not the future, and it's not already here, and it's not already everywhere. So let's just recognize this specifically. Because of mindsets and the myopia and language and paradigmatic archetypal frame for what reality is that these different populations hold. So right here in the Bay Area or in California, right in any bioregion where every one of us is, every point of view that I've spoken to that are necessarily parallel but not intimate in seeing each other's meaning and possibility, and because people are not unlocking the net worth, comes down to something like this. I remember being at the California Economic Summit with 1,000 people in San Diego, which were policy leaders and think tanks and workforce investment boards, mayors, assembly people, think tanks, academics, a few bankers. And then at the same exact time, across the bay was the SRI conference, Socially Responsible Investing Conference, with Nuveen, BlackRock, Calvert, and 1,000 of my friends who do what I do, talking about all this money that is looking for projects. And then I go to the other conference because I was facilitating or discussion or in sessions on both conferences, so I'd have to drive across the bay twice a day to go to my meetings, and going, if only this conference and that conference of people would have the same conversation. And I observed it, and that was the way that Spirit showed me directly the issue, is that people just don't, these networks don't relate. Secondly, when we talk about true partnership between economic development, which in our country is government in a very broad sense of the word, and then investing, which in our country is predominantly private sector, there's not much between those two streams that is weaving, except in a number of instances. But in other countries, there's a lot of success of public-private partnership and weaving these intentions. Case in point, the European Union having their own green bond taxonomy, the European Union Central Bank committed to climate change and trying to address those great challenges with money, which mean that, what I mean by saying that is that community of practice in Europe that is living and challenging themselves to come up with new and better systems to deploy money, the Task Force Climate Change, Climate Financial Disclosure, or what the International Finance Corp is doing, or what the Global Impact Investing Network is doing, or the EU Green Bond Taxonomy, all of those conversations that are very mature and robust. I see in the end of 21, the community of practice that work in California in particular, a very progressive state, thinking about these things. But I'd say 80% of the leadership in California who aspires does not imagine or know that it's even possible today that this is actually happening in other places because of a lack of network, a lack of bridging of intimacy. So that's what I see coming together, is people recognizing it's actually it's able to happen and happening now, because it's not some out there thing of some regenerative permaculture bunch of activists with, you know, pocketbooks and checkbooks who are investors. It's actually in the investment banks, it's in the central banks, it's in the thinking, not out there. But we can bring that right to the middle of our thinking in California rather than think it's an outside idea. So then that outside inside thinking is then collapsed by the end of 21. That it's our thinking, and it's possible because we've listened to the communities around the world and we've listened to each other enough to know that what I thought might be possible out of my ignorance, when I listen and informed, I'm realizing it's actually being done by allowing me to change my mindset and see others who are doing it and bring it home where I am, right? So that's what I've observed in the non-impact investing in the traditional finance community impact for the last 30 years. And now we need to bring that into civic society where our trillions of dollars in our pensions can also move based on this, because it's not some out there thing. It's already right here, but we need to just pick it up. So that's the merging I see in 21 and then implementation in 22.
Wonderful. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you. I know that was rather rich and would require some unpacking for me to really get to the specificity, but I think you got it, right? You got it.
I think we got it. And I want to make sure that we open the party to everyone getting together. So maybe just one last little nugget, one. So what was some of the things you did, or perhaps the people that were part of this lab, that allowed for the bridging between the networks that have been so separate?
So I've already identified quite a few imaginal cells among that 130 people that I've mentioned. Many of them are very much tracking along these lines. And the ideal dream for me would be to ask every one of them to say something like this. And it's right here. It's right here. All this is like the butterfly inside of me, inside of this chrysalis that we're in, right? So it's alive, it's very real, it's got colors and all that. So there's not a hoping, it's a living reality that informs me. So the way I like to think about this is put myself in the position of saying, we have a budget of money, we have this much money, or we have unlimited money. It's there. So here's the system that we all need to create for this bioregion, for Cascadia or the Western states or something. So since you see this vision and you hold a part of it, what is your purpose? What is your perfect expression? And if you had all the money in the world to do anything that expressed your pure intention and your pure fulfilled purpose, what would you do exactly, and how much money do you need? Okay, great. You're going to do that part and you'll get all the money you need, get to work, and then the next person, and then we identify, okay, we write all those checks, we figure out there's 3 people missing, we create that part, we fill the gaps, we fund it, we're done. And then we get to work, where no one is asked to do anything that is not their sole purpose from their soul. And no one is asked to live in scarcity, because they get to define what they need to be sure that they're going to succeed, and not like this kind of question of like, well, we can give you 1/3 of your budget, so what can you do with that? That's all bullshit. We need to get to trusting the people that know what they're doing, ensuring that we're doing our work enough to ensure that they will do what they say. And if we trust that they will do what they say when we give them the money, we give them the money and we go to work as a team. But everyone is doing their part in the bioregions. So that's the meta vision. So I'm looking for each of those people and I'm lining them all up. And that's part of my funding proposal, is to put all those people in, ask them that question, and then that becomes a budget, but we re-grant most of the money. And my role is more curation and convening and connecting and designing and doing what I've already done. It's just to continue my part, and our team would do that. So we already have all that in hand. Now we just need to get to the space of articulating and listening to who each person and who each group will do to do what, and manage the scope of the project, which is kind of what's the first how do we do a systemic first step, right? Because it can't just be, let's just do a little pilot over here like the evergreen cooperatives and hope that it will go out there. It has to be something like step 1, 2, 3. And then that's the minimum viable product. And then that's where we're starting right now. We're now in that process of defining what you just heard me say.
Wonderful.
And identifying the stakeholders. So my desire is each of us that resonate with this, that we create a way that this becomes a collective project, and then working with the 3 or 4 or the 10 other stakeholders that I'm working with and to manifest this system in the capital markets now is really my driving centerpiece, right? I'm driving this for the collective because obviously all these other pieces and people are necessary. So that's what you asked for.
It's more than what I asked for. Thank you so much, Greg. I would like for really, I thoroughly enjoyed this experience, and I want to invite Ben and Leslie to join us in the first round, and then for Dita and Christina to join us after that. And now open for
And
them.
thank you, Dunia. I know I'm so comprehensive and verbose. I appreciate the time and attention you've given to me today.
Well, thank you for all the beautiful visions and the expensive and yeah, you feel me.
It's yummy. Yeah. Thank you, Ben and Leslie, you're muted. It's so great. And I'm just so grateful that Leslie, you brought me into this. And Ben, I love you too.
Dunia studied economics at Berkeley.
Well, I saw that you were tracking Dunia on the things that would melt some people's brains. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
That Bay Area mojo is.
Mm-hmm.
I was born in Berkeley, even though we moved when I was 4 to Chicago. There's a whole thing happening here.
Mm-hmm. There's a Bay Area connection.
Maybe I'll speak to that since Ben's drinking right now. Do you want to go first, Ben, or do you want me to go?
Huh?
I have the privilege and honor to be talking to Greg more often, so I will keep this short, but I want to thank you, Greg. You weren't verbose.
No.
This is passion, systemic storytelling, and it takes space to be able to help articulate and share it and be heard. So we're grateful that you showed up to share. So just it's been so fun and inspiring for me. And I mean, I'm reminded again, every conversation with you, I realize I'm thinking too damn small. And I have to like get out of my own boundaries and barriers around financial scarcity, or I'm not going to be of service to the movement to be able to grow. So this is reminding me to do that. And you said something today that really hit me that maybe I'll be able to remember better, which is, you don't care about 30 million, and I'm thinking, 3 million's a lot. You're like, no, you don't even think 30 billion. We need to be thinking 30 billion. And that's probably just in California, So I'm inspired to kind of expand and embrace and shift my whole California frame. And I'm even more committed to be looking at this work from a state level bioregional focus. But I want to name that Cascadia has been coming up in these interviews as a core place to birth this work. And I had dreams going back to at least 10 years from now about this region from Canada down to, just above LA actually. But we'll include LA because you're there. And
I'm touching it.
Yes. So there's something here, and there's a lot of dragon energy in this dream. and whales. I have to go back and try to find my story of the dream, but it's coming up for me again now. So that's really resonating. And butterfly is also a resonant concept that's coming up, that's personal to me. And in this, so I'm just kind of naming the energetics here. There's something that wants to be born here that does not exist yet. And money and exchange and trade is at the heart of it, because it's really how we manage home. So
Yeah.
So bringing in economy is not just trading cash, right? It means management of home. So I'm gonna pause
I'll
there.
say one thing. I lived in an ashram for 4 years, and most of that time I was in the kitchen, making sure the food was on the table, right? And that I saw was an essential component. Obviously, the plumbing is the other end of that discussion, but to ensure that the food gets in and the food gets chopped and the food gets cooked and served while everyone is coming out of the meditation hall is the same kind of stewardship I'm holding, because it's just the pragmatism of our food, our water, our soil, our health, and financing that, and make sure that when we go to the market, we have enough money to buy the vegetables so that lunch is served at the meditation retreat. That simple, basic.
Life.
Same. Life and dragons.
Christiana, we'll bring you and Dita and Tanya in a second. I want to suggest that, thinking small is complementary with thinking big, and really the kind of change we're talking about requires being able to filter this money down in very, very fine degrees, throughout the whole ecosystem of change. If the system, that goes back to your really powerful story of the response to the initial plan to have 1% of people's 401ks be able to move into local community investment, and the response is, we can't place that money. It'd be the equivalent of a flood causing erosion if you don't have that, the tilth in the soil to hold that water and recycle and reuse it, and a robust ecosystem there of plants and animals. It isn't going to work. And so I think we're coming at it from that side, Leslie, in the work we've been doing, and it's essential and complementary.
It's really both and.
Yeah.
I say it's sequestering cash in the same way that rainwater in the LA River watershed is going off to the ocean, but if we can make it so we have to do both. And that 30 million, Leslie, is essential, but we need to do that 30 million in maybe 10 neighborhoods in 400 cities at once. And that coordination system is what finance has yet to create the social structure to innovate.
And I want to suggest it isn't finance's job to do that, right? That's what the grassroots movements have been doing, right? So that infrastructure now, I think our hypothesis with this lab is that infrastructure actually exists. It doesn't know that it is the infrastructure to receive that money. It's not thinking that way at all, especially investment capital. There's a whole, sort of story about the toxicity of that entire domain that listening to you has really been a nice antidote for, to say,
Yeah.
And
well, you said it well. I just want to respond directly to that, Ben. When I say to people these days, what are you up to? I said, if you want to evolve finance, you have to talk about everything other than finance and then bring financial acumen into that. So that means social structures,
right,
permaculture, ecosystem services have to inform finance, and then finance has to be informed and evolved.
Finance is the servant, not the master.
And that's where that's the new evolutionary economic theory. That is another layer of sophistication that we didn't even get to, which that would be 4, but it would be 0.1 before the 1 actually. but that's a rabbit hole. But that's that nugget, which you nailed, Ben, on both fronts, that it's systemic and catalytic and fractal. And we need to have a different model that is informing, where the mind is in service to the heart, finance is in service to systems, right? And that whole thing. So I'm just trying to reflect back what I heard you say, Ben, in words that resonate with what needs to be said to finance.
I'd love to bring in, since we're coming to the end of our appointed time, maybe we can go a little overtime. I don't know.
I'm available. I just need to make sure that there's nothing that I forgot on my calendar, but I'm free. Oh, I've got plenty of time.
I saw Christiana, who used to be a trader.
I know Christiana from.
You know Christiana, okay.
we met through Kevin Jones and the Systems Entrepreneurs, and I really love everything I heard you say, Christiana, over those years.
So you wanted to chime in, and Dita and Tanya, if you want to jump in too when she's done.
Thank you very much for welcoming me. I am honored and privileged to be here. I do want to say one thing. That's why I raised my hand. You know that I am Greek. So the word economia, economy in English, comes from two words. Ecos, which is the house or the household, and the word nomi, which is the sharing or dash allocation. Now, men go out hunting, they bring in the animal, and the women are doing the nomi, the sharing, the allocation. Of course, they don't share equal pieces, but they go around the table and they see the needs of each family member. First of all, the elder or the leader of the family gets the best piece, and it may be a very small piece, but it's the way that you do it, acknowledging that this person is the elder, therefore is getting respect, a small piece, because you don't want to have them overweight. And the second thing is that he cannot be alone, therefore the woman gets equal respect, okay, because they are the elders. And of course, the woman has to have a bigger portion for the hunters because they spend energy. And of course, they have to look at the children, what exactly the children need. Why am I relating this story? Because it is very important that we understand that economies, start in the households. Second, they're not formulas. They should be addressing the needs of the unit. Mm-hmm. And you should not have male finance ministers, because the magic is in the woman that knows exactly what the kid needs, exactly what the husband wants, and exactly how do you respect elders. And that's an art. Has nothing to do with how well you are trained in Excel sheets and how well you do equations. Thank you very much. That was my... I had to get the Greek in there.
If we could only have a spanakopita and a dinner together, I would even be happier.
You are more than... Now, I am legendary, my dear Gregory, to the hospitality that I give people. I had all the Evolutionary Leadership Institute coming, all the fellows coming here, 8 people. We stayed in this house for 8 days. And let me tell you that it was an experience. It was work hard, very hard. Be in nature and taking walks, having space, but most of all, we were sharing in preparing the food and sharing the experiences around the table. Round table because we were all equals and members. So let me tell you that I invite every person to come and visit us here. And the dream that I have, first of all, when I entered the conversation today, you see how America has got talent. You know, they see an audition, and usually if it is far beyond any expectation, they go, that just did not happen. You know, that's well, I joined this room and I'm hearing what the conversation is, and I am saying to myself, this just did not happen because I've been working so hard for the last 5 years and I have not had the conversation that I heard today. I thought I'm elevated on 7th heaven. So with that, I am going to finish my talk with the fact that I have a dream making a mountain, namely Mount Parnunas, the first factory in nature, the first natural factory in the world, which means I want young people to come here, have different business models than the ones that they got us into this mess. The models be inspired by nature, thus prototyping the first village, getting all the data to inform people that if you do this and if you are an ESG village, you're gonna have way better results than anything else. And then you take this model, you go around the 24 villages and you have an ecosystem. And of course, we can share nationally and globe-wise. My end line is the following. We work in nature and for nature. That's my mind shift. You don't work for the holder of the shares of the capitalist, but if you do a damn good job, nature pays you. So she is the employer. That's my mind change. And that's that's my innovation. I want nature to be the employer. You mess around with nature, you're kicked out. No salaries. That's it.
Yay. I want to hear about that mountain in detail someday.
Yes. And by the way, I am in the Dutch embassy incubator, and I am doing interviews for possible people that they will do business with me. So I'm asking you very politely if you can give me 10 minutes of your time so I can do an interview. Thank you.
I would give you 10 minutes 10 times over. So 100 minutes of my time is guaranteed.
This is not happening. This is not happening.
Well, I'm really here. I'm not a Zoom virtual screen. It's me. This is happening. This is now. And I'm very grateful to see you again, Christiana.
I'm sorry. So if you can send me your email, then we can arrange further. I don't want to monopolize the time, but I'm so excited. I don't know where hit me.
You know what I would love to do is anyone who is in this call to join our conversation to make this another thread from this conversation, because the things that we bring to light, Christiana, would probably inform everyone else and what I'm talking about. Because the vision I'm holding is not limited to the bioregion I live in. It's about recognizing a new pattern of reality for every bioregion on the planet, with the Mediterranean bioregions as one of my passions. Because if I'm going to work on place-based initiatives, I want to go to every Mediterranean region between now and the time I leave my body, because the food's good and there's good places to swim.
And this is Sparta. Don't remember, don't forget. I am in Mount Parnunas, that is a Natura 2000 protected area, simply because it has 242 unique species of plants found nowhere else around the globe. So we need to protect, yes.
I have some of those Greek herbs from a Greek herb company with Greek sage and others in my kitchen right now. They're very, very powerful energy. So thank you. So maybe, Leslie, we can all do an email, and whoever wants to join Christiana and me in our conversation, that would be wonderful, so that everyone's welcome to be in that one-on-one, but we'll get into details together because you've got a finance background as well.
And I want to say, this is the kind of thing we're listening for the lab. What helps people in their work that they're bringing forth into the world right now. So help us imagine what kind of, mycelial network can support these kinds of conversations that are, focused and yet open, just like this call today. I just love that Dita and Christiana are here too, and Mark was here, and Tanya and Liza. And I want to say I've spent about 3 or 4 months in Greece in my life. I love Greece. I spent about 3 months in Italy. I've loved Italy. So the Mediterranean bioregion, food, and I'm there. I'm coming too.
I'm there too. Leslie, let me just say very briefly, what you just sparked is the vision from 2008, when I created the Green Economy think tank, was recognizing whatever's going on in this bioregion, and now Cascadia as the one of the containers, is not limited to this place. It's about recognizing there's 10,000 bioregions that can benefit from this pattern of activity to ground capital in place. So my search and my innovation has been to try to find leaders who can then ground it and be a catalyst and a lightning rod where they are. So for example, just last night, I was on a Zoom call for literally 10 minutes. I was late and I got the end. I met somebody from Australia who's working with the government on public-private partnership finance and social finance in Australia. He wants to then, we spent an hour and a half talking last night to ground that he can do what we're talking about there, and then his innovations can inform here and work together as a partnership across the planet and grounding it. So then, Christiana, whatever you heard me say we're doing, you do your version where you are, and then we bring the world community to you for you to be the implementer there, and vice versa, but it has to be on a country level. It can't be just your eco village only. It becomes the birthplace of a whole movement in that eco village, right? You can see the distinction. And that's the same vision. I'm sitting here in my little hut in Santa Monica, but it's visioning $30 billion. So that same kind of big thinking, small thinking has to be done. And that becomes a little laboratory that we put together of nodes where this vision is landing. So we do it in Australia, Mediterranean, and then we have all these little points where that becomes the bottom up that Ben was talking about, but coordinated. Ding, ding, ding. Ding, 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 ding.
I am at awe. I cannot say anything because, you have it so hard for so long, you don't believe that can happen. No, but you're still going. So I was always going. And Gregory, yes, Dita?
I'm just saying goodbye. This has been really amazing. And I look forward to the Feast of the Titans. I already
Oh, yes, the Feast of the Titans.
As long as we go swimming. Okay.
Right. This has been amazing. Thank you, Gregory. Thank you, Dunia. Thank you, Ben and Leslie and Tanya and Christina and Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Vika.
And I am also now walking the path of health. I am on keto diet, and I am trying to start a whole movement of organic eating, absolutely amazing stuff. So transformation, the whole thing that you are trying to do, Gregory, I am starting with oneself, then going into the ecos, which is the house, then going into the village, then going into the nation. Because Greece has got two major cities, Athens and Salonika, and most of the population is in those cities, urban population, totally cut off from nature, and the young people are not coming back to nature. They're going to, let's say, United Kingdom to find jobs in a 9 million people city, which is London. And here we have empty villages. When Gunter Pauli was here, he said, you're sitting at a gold mine and you're complaining you have no money. That's not good. Because the enzymes that they are around here are superb. So you should be having a yeast economy. So that's where it all started. So I will be, yes.
Quickly, I'm off of gluten and wheat and grains, but I still love my pasta. So there's a almond flour pasta because I don't do potatoes, legumes, or grains. So I make lasagna and fettuccine and pizza that tastes amazing, but it has it's zero carb and it's so nutritious. So I want us to have a bunch of that in the Mediterranean so that when I travel to Italy, I can still have my spaghetti. So I don't have to import it from the United States. So let's make sure we create almond farming for all of these pastas to be able to come about. Because if the food's not great.
Let's do that. And we already have the piece of land. Almonds grow perfectly well here in Greece. And Anna Blumer has also suggested to me that we make the keto village, ESG and keto village. That's where we should start. And by the way, I baked my first such bread last Sunday. So I am with you.
I've got recipes for you. Almond coconut flour. So I'm a chef and I love making. So you can, when we talk, we'll spend at least 20 minutes, everybody. If you want recipes, we'll make sure that's part of the 100 and whatever minutes.
Okay.
So we're 9 minutes over the official time, and I know that Tanya wanted to contribute to share a question as well. So perhaps Tanya, you could share a question, and then we could officially wrap up, and whoever wants to continue can.
I'm just here with you all until we have to end. So I'm delighted to just continue. I've got nothing on my calendar. So
Wonderful.
I fell in love with all of you, by the way. So I'm just so glad that we're together.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Christina, for the awe and amazement. I share that with you. I come from Mexico. And I've been working for the last 10 years or so on peace building initiatives. One of the results from our work in conflict areas in Mexico was to initiate a sort of trade and then commercial collective.
Can you be a little bit more specific? Was it in Chiapas or in
Oaxaca and southeastern Mexico, essentially? And I mostly worked in peace building in Michoacan and Oaxaca.
Yeah, okay.
One of the issues that we have, or that we found, and is, I would dare say, persistent. I haven't been there for 3 months, but I'm kind of sure that it hasn't changed that much in that time. Is that, in fact, bridging these two worlds, or I don't know the words, worlds is the right word, but realities or stakeholders is quite difficult. Producers live in particularly those who are working specifically on regenerative agriculture and agroforestry, their mindsets are just, I don't want to say magical, but they do seem to be magical at times because it's so far beyond city understanding or city mindset. And then you add the money factor to it, and it becomes even more sophisticated. And on the other hand, when you're talking to the people who would like to buy the produce that they make, their mindset is yet even more magical and extraterrestrial in many ways. One of our challenges precisely has been to respect the way the food is produced, the land where it's produced, and the cultures that produce the food. And then bridging that to economic terms and financial possibilities. And what we find, or what we have found, is that, as you very clearly stated, the pieces that need to come to place in that dialogue are scarce, at least in our context, dramatically misinformed about the difference, not the difference, but the different possibilities that there are in terms of, it's not just buy and sell, but the myriad of possibilities from producing to selling to consuming. And I wonder if, when you talk about bridging those gaps or re-networking that network, what are your thoughts about producers? Where do you see them, or how do you see this network coming together so that that baseline is, I mean, and by that baseline, I mean the soil, producers are the soil. They are the land. They are the produce. There's no difference. There's no, I mean, of course they understand the produce is not them, but the intricate beliefs that come in that production are just one thing. They're together. So how
you've evoked a lot of images and feelings and ideas, but are you done? I want to wait, and I totally feel you. So
I'm just wondering how.
What I see is, like, you know, the slow food movement, and also I don't know if you said it this way, but the urban and then the people in the land, right? That there's so much magic in listening to the land, that for the urban people, you said the word extraterrestrial, as if the urban people imagine those shamanic farmers are from space, but it's actually that the urban people are completely out of touch with the earth, and they're so out of touch with what is earth that they don't even know earth when they see it, of the magic of this place. And that is the disenchantment of our narrative from 20,000 different types of potato in the Andes to potato, right? And then losing the relational history of that line of that purple potato and the value of that I would pay $100 for one potato if it was the right one, kind of, because that means there's real value beyond the commodity, right? And that's something that comes in the way that humans communicate through story, and the value that's communicated in story through relationship in relationship. So then it's a relational human issue, right? It's a human relationship to land and history and place and biodiversity of all the different types of, but then also to then keep those relational nuance and valuing the additional financial and economic value of the rarity of diverse crops. For example, when it comes to the global movement of food, there's 70,000 different types of edible plants, and the crop trust, who's trying to maintain this diversity of seed with that seed vault and the 1,800 seed vaults they have around the world, those seeds alone do not live well without the humans that know the story of those plants and how they like to live. You can't pull a seed out of the vault without knowing what kind of climate that particular apple will grow well in. That comes from storylines, from lineages of farmers. That is where the real wealth is of that plant-human symbiosis, because you cannot have the plant without the human and vice versa in those agriculture lineages. And that's what is missing in the wealth of the commoditized food system, right? So then by recognizing how we got here and how we need to go back to here, then we can start putting the conversation of money and food and relationship and value creation together, like the slow money movement attempted and is attempting to, in the slow food movement, and then creating them. So then where that goes into today's urban context is the restaurant, that chef that says, I will buy 3 boxes of those tomatoes that are so rare, but I want them to be experienced by my customers and I'll pay for them. That's the economy where we can tie that to the pricing, but also the farmer's market by saying, I know you, I'll pay twice as much for your tomatoes because I love you and I know you're growing those tomatoes that no one else ever grows anymore. So that those two relationships in the context of a food are becoming the economic value, but we have to create the systems to organize that food distribution. And that's where the relationships between the money people and the food people have to then become more intimate. That's not only regenerative agriculture, because that still commoditizes soil as a product rather than the relationships of permaculture and place. But that's what you evoked. And I know, Tanya, I went on a lot, but I gave us the ingredients that when we unpack, we can possibly create a system.
And I think
that builds on what you know.
Sorry.
No, I'm just saying the system of addressing that particular Michoacan place to learn from what Carlo Petrini's doing in Italy or the slow food movement did in America, and to try to weave that into the Mexican context could help some of these issues between these populations by taking these existing systems, but bringing it into a new cultural bioregional context where 90% of the people in Mexico may not even know that slow money or slow food exists. But if we bring those stories there, we can help the locals in the Michoacan and those conflict areas. Oh, that big tequila farmer that made a lot of money could then help invest in the food around him, because he now sees there's a way of doing it that is different than he knows, and teaching the money people to invest in place by valuing diversity when they weren't trained that way in school. That's my thinking. I'm just thinking.
And that
you just got
precisely how we went from peace building to I don't know, became engaged with food production systems. It stemmed from that, finding that, as Gandhi would say, we need to find a salt that unites this country. We kind of came to the conclusion that food was the one thing that actually everybody in Mexico would be interested in, and everybody resorts to. And by everybody, I truly do mean everybody. And there are business people, men and women, involved in this process that you've just spoken about, particularly in Oaxaca, Michoacán, Veracruz, Chiapas, and Yucatan.
Well, it's so great.
The Martian analogy works both ways. We are Martians to one side and to others, and those of us who kind of walk those paths, that look more or less like a Martian depending on where we're standing, but we're always Martians, like we are always. And my questions were about how do you see the trickle down effectively?
Well, here's what Christiana just put into the chat when she said only the rich can eat like peasants. What a brilliant and crazy thought, right? But then when we think about ecotourism, right? Or my favorite experience is traveling overseas in countries that are not, very wealthy, right, was to be with people in relationship who live in place and eating the food of place as a wealthy tourist. Yet the wealth is really in sitting with and having everybody eat that food together and share the abundance. So I'm hosted in the house that has so much of that abundant food, and I pay more for it to make sure to underwrite the value of this house and this community, because I'm bringing money to buy that experience and those relationships rather than pull that food into the 5-star restaurant at the resort down the street, right? So there's a distinction that the neighborhood next to the resort, that is where the farmer lives, becomes an eco village tourist destination. But then it means that it's not me coming in from outside watching those people like they're in an aquarium. It's more about I get to meet and relate, and we get to meet and relate. And then when they come to my home, all this kind of, so it's that dimension of people hosting people and the best food we have, and we all get to eat it together, which is the spirit. But then how do we create an economy of that blessing is to then ensure that the relationship between the people and the welfare of those people, like Christiana was talking about, is held as the most value, not the least. The relationship between the people and the experiences is that. And that's what, using that word that Charles Eisen said, an economy of mutual blessing, right? But that means if I'm giving you a blessing, it has to be that I can receive your blessing because I see you as someone who can bless me. So that means it has to be equals in the vision, because if you go back to, with no disrespect to anybody, but to the colonial mindset that comes and said, I'm bringing something that's better than, and I'm giving these poor little people something, that's not equal. But if we go, oh my God, I've got so much to share, and look at the bounty of light and love that they have, and I can receive that, and I've got something to give too, and then you've got something to give, it becomes equals, sharing from difference. So we're different, but we're equal, rather than the same and equal. And that is the capacity to see the same and the different at the same time, which is a really central thought. It's a cognitive leap, because it means that we have to hold two different things at once in the mind, which means that you have to use the primate brain, not the mammal brain. So the primate brain can hold multiple thoughts at once, and the brain of the mammal is the amygdala: fight, flight, feed, procreate, the 4 F's. So when most people are in trauma, then they're in anger, they go to populist leaders like we see today in the fascist right and left. Then there's that distorted myopia. But when people are in harmony and in openness, they can see the distinction of the other disagreeing and the other agreeing, and they can see two at once rather than just one or the other. So that it enables that comes out of relationship and open-heartedness. But all of that's so complex, I know, very much so, Tanya, but I just wanted to speak to what you awoken in me, that when we get down into the details, it will apply in the Michoacan context, but it has to be done with nuance, and because it can't be done with us very privileged people to sit and just theorize about people on the ground that have only this much land and this much product to sell to market. And we can't come in and just give them an idea and tell them that we've fixed their problem. It has to be in relationship, right? And this also happens in farming communities here in America. I mean, I know regenerative and local farmers that are struggling as well, and they're like the American equivalent of that smallholder farmer in Africa or Latin America. It's the same system, but it's just different scale. They might have $100,000 problem and the farmer in Mexico has $100 problem, but it's the same systemic dynamic, and they're victimized as well by this commodification problem in America. So that's why when I started this work 10, 15 years ago, I saw that the pattern is the same, just different scale. And by resolving the problem in my community of smallholder farmers, I can help resolve it by transmitting these systems to others. But that's my way of seeing it. And I'm not presuming it's yours. I just want you to know, I see the universality of this problem. And again, I know I've gone on, but you've just inspired so many thoughts that I haven't been able to share so far.
Well, I want to,
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Tanya.
I'm aware that Leslie has
to talk more, Tanya, if you want. I want to hear more about the situation.
And we can continue to go on. I just know that Leslie has to go because she has another call. So I wanted to give her a chance to have a few words, perhaps to part as a co-host and leader in this initiative.
Just wanted to say, since I invited Gregory into this circle, just didn't want to just leave. So thank you so much for being who you are and joining us with your fabulous energy and wisdom today, Greg. Thanks a lot. Sorry, I have to go. I don't know if it's the right time to stop the recording either, but
perhaps
I'm open to whatever you want.
I will stop the recording now. Wonderful. Thank you, Leslie.